This is the Ivy League Hoops Hour, where we cover all things men's basketball in the Ancient Eight. We are your hub, your go-to, your day one, but not really, though. I'm your co-host, Coach Sidney Johnson, former head coach of the Princeton Tigers from 2007 to 2011, and former three-time captain of the Tigers in 95, 96, and 97. My co-host is Princeton alumnus and former Princeton graduate assistant coach, Lawrence L. Boogie Schuler. Lawrence, how you making out?
Outstanding, Coach. How are you?
Doing terrific. Thanks, Lawrence. And I'm hoping our listeners are doing as well as we are. Continue to join us week in and week out. It's a labor of love for us, as we mentioned. And we also want you to join this conversation. So don't forget to email us with your suggestions, your feedback, suggested guests, whatever comes to mind. Please email us at ivyleaguehoopshour@gmail.com and encourage your friends, your family, colleagues to join us, subscribe, follow, give us a 5-star rating, and join the conversation. Let's get started. We are highlighted by our interview with Tosan Evbuomwan, Princeton forward extraordinaire, and a visit from our chief correspondent, Jon Solomon. Let's get this show started. This week's segment of My Eyes Don't Lie to Me features a much welcomed and honored guest, and dare I say, chief correspondent, to join our review of last week's Ivy League conference games. Our guest is on this segment, and he has previously been mentioned on our show as an inspiration for this podcast, in that his devotion, professionalism, and experienced take on all things Princeton men's basketball was expertly crafted into the website he created entitled PrincetonBasketball.com on September 29th, 2013. PrincetonBasketball.com offered its final post. And I can honestly tell you the Johnson family, among many others that followed the Tiger program closely, took the news with a great deal of sadness. These days, in addition to being a devoted husband and father to a beautiful little girl, our guest appears regularly on Princeton, New Jersey-based radio station WPRB and has kept his consecutive streak of attending Princeton Ivy League contests well intact. He is fast approaching 300 straight games attended. We have none other than Jon Solomon. Jon, thanks for joining us on the show.
Cue Al Pacino in Godfather 3, because just when I thought I was out, pulled me back in.
Indeed. And we are thrilled to do so, of course, as we are every week, joined by my host, Lawrence L. Boogie Schuler. Lawrence?
Feeling great. It's great to have you here, Jon.
No, this is a real treat. It's always great to talk with you guys, and I'm a big fan of the show.
Well, let's dive right into the schedule. First game up, Friday night's Columbia and Princeton game.
Yeah, Friday versus Columbia at Jadwin Gym, an 84-69 Princeton win. When I was thinking about this game beforehand, the 4 words that came to mind were bring your own juice, because when Northwestern and the rest of the Big Ten played football in empty stadiums in 2020, the Wildcats' mantra was bring your own juice. So the question to me was, how do you generate energy in a near spectator-free Jadwin Gym? Friday was the first Princeton game with any meaning since December 13th of last year. And there were, I counted, 17 people in the stands at tip-off. It was a surreal, dystopian experience. And in the first half, the Tigers played like a team that had waited 25 days between contests.
Yeah.
While it's fair, Columbia had also been on an unplanned extended hiatus. It was Princeton with the rusty decisions in the opening frame, and the Tigers just did not match Columbia's energy. The Lions bench chanted defense, defense on many first-half possessions while the Tigers sat in silence, and Columbia raced to an early 15-4 lead, which extended to 45-33 at the break after a sequence where holding for the last shot, the Tigers' Jalen Llewellyn went too quickly to the rim and left enough time remaining for Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa to bury a deep right arc 3 at the horn. After an 0-for-9 start from distance, Princeton made their first 2 3-point attempts out of the break, the start of an incredible 37-11 run. including a 20-point scoreboard flip in the first 10 minutes of the second half alone. Speaking of juice, some student athletes from other sports showed up to stomp on the bleachers and provided a modest boost of energy from the stands. Ike Nweke was a serious problem, but when the Tigers made him take mid-range jumpers, he was decidedly less effective than he was at the rim. Once Princeton got rolling, they extended their lead to as many as 18 and were not threatened. 0 for 9 from 3 in the first half, 6 for 12 in the second, make shots, win games. Concerning for Princeton was a lower body injury suffered by Llewellyn with just over 6 minutes left in the second half. He could not put weight on his leg as he was helped off the floor by two teammates. Strategically, I was interested to see Columbia back off Tosan Evbuomwan in the lane, trying to slow his first step to the rim, baiting him into taking a jumper, which to his credit he never did. I'll be curious to see if other opponents use a similar approach. Tosan still finished the night with a team-high 22 points in 30 minutes, making 11 of his 21 field goal tries. That's Friday night.
Excellent recap, John. And as I'm kind of walking or imagining myself in Mitch Henderson's spot, where I'm thinking about that layoff that you referred to, and it almost sounds like, and it looked like, in terms of halftime score, that the Tigers were shell-shocked. I have to think that halftime discussion with the guys in the team room, in the John Rogers team room, was pretty passionate, pretty heated, because it just seemed like the Tigers were, and I struggle to say this with such a good team and one that I think is going to win the league, but maybe going through the motions, and Columbia playing with a lot more heart. And then, the defensive approach that the Lions put on Tosan is going to be very interesting. It's a pretty good move to lay off of him, dare him to shoot, and then really hone down on that playmaking ability to try to limit that, because he leads the league in assists. So wonderful week recap. I do think it shows a lot in terms of championship DNA, though, to get punched in the mouth and at halftime be able to make the corrections and roll off, they get on a roll like the dominant team that the Tigers are. That says a lot, and their response, you're always measured by your response. Their response was pretty impressive, but I'm tipping my hat to the Lions because they had a very, very good performance there for about 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah, once Princeton got up by 2 possessions, it really felt like that was it, that the game was decided, and it just rolled from there.
That certainly happens too, and that's kind of that HYPP, and especially that PP in terms of Princeton and Penn. There's a belief there that's been passed on year after year after year that we're supposed to win these games. And so I think it's tough for the challenger to kind of take on a different mentality, and that's why you got to credit Harvard has done a good job in the league, and Yale as well, and Cornell obviously under Steve Donahue, and hopefully carrying on with Brian Earl. But that expectation to win, you kind of rise up to the standard, and that's what Princeton did, and it's certainly going to be challenged a lot this year as people are coming for them. So that's Columbia, Princeton, Cornell, Penn. Lawrence, what were your takeaways?
The final scoreline, it was a little surprising. It was back and forth throughout, and I felt like Cornell was going to be able to keep their pace up and their pressure on, but in the end, it seemed like Penn just outlasted them.
Yeah, I was shocked. I was really impressed to see Penn's league opening win against Brown, and especially because I really think Brown has a shot this year, the top 4. Lawrence and I have talked about that. And then I thought Cornell would have a healthy enough respect and focus to come into the Palestra and try to put up as many points as they can and to play fast and the whole thing. But Penn was certainly ready for them, held Cornell in the 60s. Cornell is typically in the high 70s and flirts with 80s, and then scored 79 of their own points. And Penn can shoot the basketball. They're going to challenge a lot of people because they're offensively efficient and really love the three-point shot. And Jordan Dingle commands so much pressure or attention, I should say, from the opponents, and then he's able to free up different guys. So well done by Steve Donahue to get that one done. And they're off to a very good start in league play, which is a surprise going into the league with a 3-10 record. But they are playing, and in terms of my eyes don't lie to me, I'm seeing a Penn Quaker team that's playing much better and getting the results that they want versus, what they showed in the non-conference schedule. And so, in another week or two, I'm going to have to react to this improved play and start kind of considering them more in the middle and possibly top of the league. Brown, Harvard, kind of expected, that was a prediction that I felt pretty strongly about. Really impressed with what Brown does defensively and their depth. The kid Gainey, this is where the value of analytics kicks in. Not only does he block shots, and so obviously he's leading the conference in block shots, but his impact on the quality of shot for the opponent. The commentators love to say, well, he didn't block it, but he definitely affected it. Well, that's essentially effective field goal percentage. That's in that stat in terms of an analytic, a modern day or analytic, or points per possession. The points per possession of the opposing team when Gainey is on the floor certainly plummets and is certainly much lower than when he's off the floor and somebody else is out there trying to clean up and affect shots. So points per possession defense with this kid is outstanding. And then not to mention the other perimeter defenders that they have, whether it's a Cho or a Mitchell or a Ferrari. They really get after it. Harvard could not make enough shots. When they did, they were able to get about an 8, 9, 10-point lead, but you can't shoot your way all the way to a championship. And it's really hard to shoot your way to a conference win, especially when you're not offensive rebounding and getting free throws. So Brown did what they needed to do. They locked down Harvard. They scored enough and efficiently, and the kid Cowan came off the bench and made 5 threes. He made his first 5 threes, guys, and he was really a difference maker in terms of that game.
Now, Harvard did get off to a pretty good start, and at that point, I think I texted you and said, I can't believe I let you psych me out of picking Harvard over Brown. And then about 5-10 minutes later, Brown went on I think it was a 20-2 run.
Right. 40-minute game, 2 halves. And I just thought over the course of play, I've coached teams where we're very perimeter oriented in terms of our offensive approach, and we have a good attack there, but we didn't really have a good balance, guys, inside, whether it was getting layups, post-ups, free throws. And that's what I see when I look at Harvard. Now, mind you, they have some of the better players in the conference, and Noah Kirkwood and Chris Ledlum. Those guys are going to get it done and going to score night in and night out. But without any kind of balance for easy baskets, again, layups, post-ups, free throws, offensive rebounds, you're a make or miss team. And that's what Harvard is right now. And again, against a very good defensive unit, I just felt like they were going to come up short over the course of the game. That's Friday. Obviously, Yale and Dartmouth postponed. Yale dealing with some COVID issues, still hasn't played. They've played 2 games, guys, in the month of December, I believe on the 13th and the 28th, 28th being St. Mary's, the 13th being a loss to Monmouth. And they have been on pause since then. So we'll get to them coming up this week as we hope that they're getting healthy and back to playing competitive games. Being newcomers to podcasting ourselves, Lawrence and I want to bring your attention to a podcast that we have come to enjoy. Although they occasionally get to the pop culture or sports they claim to cover, Noah Savage spends most of his time on the World According to Noah Savage podcast, telling stories about himself, and tries to keep his wife and fellow comedian Alyssa Wolf from falling asleep. Whether it's bombing horribly on a stand-up show, getting a technical foul in a men's league game, or explaining why he had dog poop on his shoe in a work meeting, Noah and Alyssa truly never run out of things to tell each other on this hilarious weekly podcast, available on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We encourage you to check them out. Now, let's get back to the Ivy League Hoops Hour. And so that rolls us right into Saturday. Let's start with you, John, in terms of the Cornell-Princeton game.
Yeah, let's go back to Jadwin Gym for Princeton's 72-70 win on Saturday night. I had 2 things coming into this game. The first being it matters to Brian Earl. He would never admit it, but I believe playing and beating Princeton means an exceptional deal to your prior podcast guest, Coach Brian Earl of Cornell. His teams always have the Tigers scouted ridiculously well and take away things that other teams don't or can't. I think about the way Cornell doubled Richmond Ariraguzo from unexpected angles the last 2 times these teams met and took him very much out of his comfort zone. And even when, like they do this year, Princeton has the better squad on paper, Earl's staff scout makes up a considerable difference. And the second thing I had about this game coming in, based on the injury on Friday night, was looking for leadership. With Jalen Llewellyn sidelined, and I don't know how precautionary that decision was. I don't know if he would have been able to play if, say, this was for an NCAA tournament bid. But Princeton now had a lot of available minutes to spread around, but also was looking for leadership. And this led to the first career start for sophomore guard Matt Alaco. More on him later. Instead of rust as on Friday, it was to me clearly the absence of Llewellyn that hindered the Tigers as they fell behind 10-4 and 18-9. There was again a lot more energy from the visiting bench as the Big Red looked to get out and go on every make. The biggest difference to me at the break on Saturday as compared to Friday's 12-point deficit and the 39-25 margin that Cornell held was that the Big Red are just a far better offensive team than Columbia. So in the second half, Princeton decidedly ran offensive possessions through Tosan. Real focus to get him touches. He was, for the first 25 minutes, the only player on the floor Princeton could get. Like you were saying, Coach, you need to have players you can get easy stuff through, and he was that for Princeton. It took until 10:47 left in the contest for Ethan Wright's first field goal, a basket in transition plus the foul. Turning point of the game came with 16 minutes left. Tigers are down 47-29, and Princeton went to a 1-3-1 on defense. So kudos to the Tiger coaching staff. To me, there was no way they were going to come back otherwise. And Cornell had some turnovers because of this defense, but more it was uncomfortable shots, considerable difficulty finding anything clean. It made a high-tempo offense tentative, and the worst thing you can be offensively, even with a lead, is indecisive. You had back-to-back Drew Freiberg triples that were offset by a Keller Boothby three, one of the rare looks in those final 16 minutes the Big Red found from overloading the zone in the paint and kicking out. It's a 14-point game with 11 minutes to go. And then in the stretch run, Princeton adapted their 1-3-1 further, putting Tosan at the top of the defense. Tigers pulled even at 64 on an Ethan Wright three with a Tosan assist, took their first lead with 1:08 left to go on a free throw after Tosan was fouled following an offensive rebound. And then we come to the conclusion of the game. After the missed front end of a 1-and-1 with the Tigers up 69-68, Princeton surprisingly went man-to-man on their final 2 defensive possessions. There was some confusion on a perimeter switch, which let Dean Knoll drive unabated right to the rim with 4 seconds showing. Big Reds up 70-69, inbound to Ryan Langborg. Got the ball over half court to Alaco, who, without Llewellyn's injury, would almost certainly not have been on the floor. He rose up over 2 Cornell defenders for a birthday boy game winner three that kept the Tigers perfect in league play, sent the Big Red back to Ithaca winless on the weekend. The 2-point margin of victory was the Tigers' biggest lead of the entire night. There was a review after the buzzer, see if it should have counted. The Cornell players thought they'd won, but Brian Earl knew otherwise. It counts. The score stands. And the Tigers have the 2-point win. As an aside, I was rear-ended by the clock operator on my drive home, but I did not get a chance to ask him while we were trading information about the final play. It reminded me of the last time Princeton and Cornell played at Jadwin pre-pandemic. There was a equally frenzied finish, but a decidedly different result. Princeton goes 7 for 13 from 3 in the second half, and they just play like a team to me that's as comfortable trusting one another as any Tiger squad I can remember recently. And lastly, to bring it back to my first point from the Columbia game, whatever crowd there was seemed to be made up again of other student athletes who are still on campus while the rest of the school remains on extended break. They had a lot of fun. They stomped their feet on the bleachers, and I didn't think there would be any atmosphere. And during the comeback, it was pretty spirited, despite all of the attendance limitations in place. So that is the excitement from Jadwin on Saturday.
Well, there's nothing that makes a fan, even if it's a student athlete fan, happier than to hear the sound of his or her own voice. So the fact that they could come in and have an impact on the game, I'm sure was awesome and not lost by them. Jon, I'm wondering, did you catch the reaction of Mitch Henderson, head coach Mitch Henderson, when Alako, right before he took the shot and after it went down and the whole, did you, or maybe on the replays, did that stick out to you at all? Did you catch that?
On the replays, when I looked at it first on my phone afterwards, the main thing I was checking was, because Cornell seemed so sure, the players, that they had won, I was checking the graphic on the broadcast.
Right.
And Alako has the ball in his hand at all zeros, but it's not the Jadwin clock that it's showing. It's the broadcast clock. And if you go forward a couple frames, the red light behind the scoreboard doesn't go off until the ball is in the air. So mostly on the replay, I was focused on that. And the lone fan you can see behind the bench, who's a gentleman that both you and I know, who puts his hand in the air when the ball goes through. Those were the two things that I noticed on the replay. I don't know if the coaching staff was even visible, but I didn't look for that. I'll have to go back and check. Why do you ask?
It looked to me, and I have to ask Mitch when I get to him, whether it's text, call, or in the spring, summer, it looked to me like he had his hands, both hands on his head. And again, I don't want to start anything, but I'm as if he's like, what are you doing? And I didn't know, I really wasn't sure. And I thought I saw a bit of anguish, almost like, I don't know if you guys watched the national championship game last night, but when the Georgia kid makes the interception late in the game, the head coach is screaming at him from the sidelines to go down.
Sure.
He's saying, go down, go down, go down. If you watch the replay, these are the things that I cue into. He's telling the kid to go down because he doesn't want him to fumble it on any kind of return. He says go down 6 or 7 times and is running along the sideline with the kid as he sprints the ball in for pick 6. So it's funny what us coaches do. So I was, again, speculating some, but I was a little bit confused by Mitch's reaction. I was wondering if he didn't quite want Alako to take the shot or, wanted a timeout, or probably not a timeout. But again, I thought his reaction was a little bit disconnected from what happened, which was all net and looked like, hey, I'm built for this. I mean, as much as he has been a bit of a role player, considering they have the best backcourt in the league behind Wright and Llewellyn, Alako has given them quality minutes, but is a role player nonetheless. And he took that shot with the confidence of a KG veteran, like, hey, this is what they brought me here for. So it was an interesting bit of emotions. And then obviously you mentioned Cornell's reaction. I'll say this.
Let me come back to you with two things. I guess one, I gather Alako is not lacking in confidence. So not surprising that he'd go up in that moment. But I do think you might have cracked the code with the timeout question, because the Tigers had, by my recollection, 2 remaining. So if they push it from 4 when Cornell takes the lead and get over half court with, say, 2, you can call a timeout and run a set something for the win. So maybe that was what they were supposed to do. Maybe it went away from script, but the result is the result.
Yeah, they'll live with it. And then to echo your first point in terms of framing the game, Brian Earl is one of the most competitive guys that I've ever played with. And I've played a good amount of basketball, college and professionally, and played against some dudes who can play, who can ball. And Brian looks one way, he presents himself one way, but on the court, I mean, he's an assassin. I'll never forget the first year I came back from playing professional basketball in Italy, and I was starting to kind of hit my groove as a player and getting close to my prime. And I came back to play pickup ball with the guys in the summer and pretty much had my way with everyone except Brian, who was still in school and was a leader of the team alongside Gabe. And guarding him, honestly, I don't know if I got to stop. Okay. I mean, he might have scored on me every time he had an opportunity. I can't remember the final outcome of the games, the pickup games throughout the day. But I remember going, my former teammate, good dude, and we're very close, but he kicked my today, and that's just kind of his approach. So in terms of being the head coach at Cornell, but having helped add a great deal to the legacy at Princeton, you best believe he's coming in with a good team with Cornell this year and trying to get a W. And I'm sure it's been a tough few days for him to deal with having an excellent scouting report, being highly prepared and a very good team, and losing an 18-point lead in the second half. And then I'll say this, Jalen Llewellyn, I've got some predictions for games coming up, and they all hinge on whether he's playing or not. I mean, the kid is going for 16 points per game. He is a big shot maker. He's a steady hand. He can cut through the defense, create his own offense. And they often, if they're not playing through Tosan, they'll actually play through Llewellyn. They'll actually post him up. I've seen Mitch do that in late in games. Guards aren't comfortable defending him, and he gets an easy two at the rim. He was cutting through high major defenders, Minnesota, South Carolina. I mean, the kid's legit, and their title run certainly hinges on a healthy Jalen Llewellyn. I have Tosan as the Ivy League Player of the Year, and we're thrilled to have him on the show. But there is no question that Jalen Llewellyn is a baller, and the Tigers need a healthy point guard to get this championship on their side. John, if you don't mind, I really do want to talk about your streak, and just continuing to go to all these games, what it's meant to you. It's taken on a life of its own, and just thoughts, reflection that you can share with us just as you've seen this program grow and you've been so close to it. Just what has it meant to you? What does it mean?
Yeah, it's wild. So I guess I've been to 290 straight Princeton Ivy games by my count, including the NCAA play-ins and the Ivy tournaments that Princeton's been a part of the past few years. But when I was, I love spreadsheets. So when I was making a spreadsheet to count this all up and looked back, and I was like, wow, the first one was the last 3 games of the 2000 season. Like, I was still living in Chicago then. I hadn't even, I'd just come home for a long weekend to go to those games. So, that's the thing about streaks, is they keep going. And so, even after I stopped covering games, I really grew to like the experience of going away for these weekends, especially the Friday, Saturday ones, and especially traveling with my dad. Like, he shot photos for me after Stephen Goldsmith went off to college to take things back well over a decade. And so, we have these traditions on these trips where if it's the Brown Yale weekend, we got to get donuts at the place outside of Providence, and we got to go to the Yale Art Museum, and we got to get pizza in New Haven. So to me now, it's about basketball, but it's also not about basketball at all. I don't mean to diminish the game. I still really like watching basketball games, but it's kind of about the experiences and the people that we get to see that I wouldn't get to see if I wasn't doing these things every year. I have a cousin who lives up in Hanover, and getting to spend time with her family annually and watch her kids grow and trade stories between my family and her family. Like, I got into it for the basketball, and it really became, and you two are part of that. And I'm not saying this just because we're on a podcast together. Like, it's the people that drove me down the stretch and continue to now. And so, yeah, I guess that's a very circuitous answer to what this means to me. And I'm sure someday it'll end. I'll get a flat tire on my way to Ithaca or something, or Oh, the alarm won't go off, though that's kind of unlikely, but I think it would be cool to get to 300. That would be a real nice round number to reach. And, who knows? I don't know who holds the record. Maybe Coach Carril. Coach Carril, yeah. I'm coming for you. I'm cutting my promo on Coach Carril now. But we'll see. But it's wild, and to think that, like, a lot has changed in everyone's lives since the 1999-2000 season. Seen a lot of things come and go, and people come and go, and just to have this constant through it all, now that you're making me actually think about it, is it's kind of weighty.
It's beautiful what you shared. I want to read something to you, very brief, that I posted on social media the other day. I said, and I was talking about being back in the gym, and I said, I can say this with all honesty. In the same way that I witnessed my kids growing up, I can see the brightest moments in my life reflected in the different gyms I've been in. And I was thinking of those words as you're speaking. It seems to me that this streak and this connection with Princeton basketball, but just like you said, it's been so much more about the life that you've been blessed with and the relationships and the times that you've been able to spend with people that happen to be associated with basketball. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And like, look, we're going all over the place here, but 2001 at Columbia, I asked a woman I had just met if she wanted to meet me at the game and go out afterwards. And that's my wife. So, like, she didn't know that I was going to go talk to Coach Thompson afterwards and then have to, type up a recap and drive to Ithaca the next morning. But Princeton got stomped in that game, and my dad said, "Yeah, you shouldn't come to games anymore." Things like that, or the fact that I have photos of my daughter, who's 13 now, like as an infant, crawling from one end of Jadwin to the other. Like, as I said before, and maybe this is it's about basketball, but it's not about basketball. And right. I mean, I think that's the sort of thing where, like, when I was in the trenches and covering games all the time, like, it meant a lot to me, but it wasn't all of me. But a life is all these different things kind of interlaced and intertwined. And so going to Ivy League basketball games is a significant portion of it, but it's not the complete story.
Beautiful. John, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have a favorite player from Princeton? You've seen so many games. Of the games that you've seen during these 290, soon to be 300, give me a player.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. The first name that I'd like, is this sort of one of those things where it's first answer, right answer?
It's whatever answer you deem fit.
I don't know. Kyle Wente came to mind immediately. I always liked that guy and enjoyed getting to know his family. And I'm not a great basketball player. Please don't ever ask me to go to my left under any circumstances. But I don't know. When I was a kid, when I was in high school or grade school and first started going to Princeton games, like Matt Henshin was a player who I was like, I see myself a little bit in that guy. And I think
nice guy.
Kyle was one of those guys where it's like, oh, he worked really hard. I know if I played basketball, at the very least, I don't know if I'd be good, but I'd work hard. So that's the first guy that came to mind. And then it's funny how you kind of root for different guys or notice certain things about them. Like, I liked Kyle Kuntz a lot because I could always tell that things were happening in his, like, he knew things that were happening in the game that nobody else realized were happening. Like, he had an internal clock, like just the fact that he would walk to the bench knowing it was a media timeout before anyone else was aware it was a media timeout. Like, right. I always appreciated that. So I don't know why those are the first two names that come to mind.
That's
recently I always found myself rooting for Amir Bell. I felt like there was a lot on his shoulders and I wanted him to succeed. But as I've become less and less involved with the daily machinations and, talking to players, families after games, it's a bit more of a disconnect where now I can just kind of sit back and watch basketball as compared to trying to jot everything down. Like, I can look places instead of where the ball is now. And that makes it a bit more of an enjoyable experience. And getting to go home right afterwards as compared to then having to, write for 3 or 4 hours and edit photos and audio and all of that, it is kind of freeing. So going to games and talking on podcasts about the games, that might be the path forward for me.
Yeah, nice little in between. I love it. Amir and a couple of Kyles. One more then for you. Best player you've seen on the opposing team during this streak.
Having the best 5 guys to win the conference matters, but I think you need this sort of unicorn player who can do one thing remarkably well, better than anyone else in the gym. And that makes me realize that I didn't mention Kareem when I was talking about favorite players. And
Kareem Max, yep.
Yeah. And he's a guy who, the player and the person that he developed into, it was impossible not to pull for that guy. So I'll add him as well. But while I was talking about unicorns, I think about Oni from
Yale.
Yale.
Yeah.
I was he's a guy where it's you just tip your hat. It's you're good. And, a couple other players like that where it's just, I think he's in the time between your playing and your coaching. But I mean, there were some players at Penn, like Onyekwe, where it was just man, that is good college basketball player. So I don't know if those guys were the best of the opposition, but those were definitely 2 where, you can't help but be impressed with what they're able to bring to the floor every time out. And both of those guys were kind of, unicorns where you call their number, you draw something up for them. And heck, Cornell during their Sweet 16 run with Foote and Whitman, they kind of got to have 2 players like that in the same 5. So it's no wonder they were as good as they were.
Outstanding. I would say, John Thompson III, obviously a friend of the show and a mentor of mine, and he would talk about teams that had answers for everything. And I think you mentioned 2 players from opposing teams that they seem to have the answer for the game themselves. So that unicorn analogy is outstanding. They can do something and bring something to the table that nobody else can, and nobody else can figure out how to stop or deal with. So it's a perfect description of what can certainly lead you to a championship and kind of figure out those moments when it goes beyond the scouting report, John.
I mean, I think Tosan for Princeton is kind of a unicorn in that regard. And I realize I listed mostly long athletic guys. The other name that I had written down, and maybe you disagree, Laurent Rivard from Harvard was just one of those, he could do one thing and he could do it remarkably well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just a guy who, you need someone to bang a shot. They're going to bang a shot. Every time that guy shot, I thought it was going in. I didn't care for it, but I thought it was going in. And so those are players who they made their teams great.
You echoed my sentiments exactly in terms of Rivard. I'll tell you this one thing. I won't take exception to that, but I'll take exception to not noting Lewis Dale. I think for that Cornell team, I think he's the guy that isn't talked about enough, or somebody that I just want to talk about more in terms of his impact on those great Cornell teams for Donahue. I just, you have Whitman who can make all kinds of shots and tough ones, and like a mid-major version of a Steph Curry, because it wasn't just catch and shoot. It was running from here and to there and back foot high and fadeaway NBA and pull-up jump and all that. And then Jeff Foote, just ridiculous footwork in the package of a 7-foot guy, and got stronger and tough enough to deal with people banging on him and still dunking and finishing. But Dale was he drove the bus,
he's the motor.
Yeah. His ball handling, his decision making, his pace, his frankly unguardability. You couldn't stay in front of him, and you got to get the ball to all these different guys and get the team going in this outstanding offensive system that Donahue has. You need a high level point guard. And they were playing their junior and senior years where they were very dominant in the league. They also went out and scheduled up to play, high major opponents. And he's going toe to toe with 4 and 5 star recruits. So that's a guy that I think if they had lesser of a point guard, it would have helped our effort to slow these guys down, because you can double team the post. You can just face guard a shooter. But when you have a ball handling point guard who can score and makes great decisions with those other pieces, good luck. We struggled with how to neutralize him, because then we felt like we could affect the other guys, and it just never seemed to come off. We took a lot of pride in, having 1 possession games against them that very dominant Sweet 16 year, but we ultimately still came up short. I looked at stats the other day, as you talk about going down memory lane. I looked at stats the other day, or box scores of Cornell's championship year, and help me out. Was that 2000 and
8, 9, and 10.
2008, 9, and 10. So I looked at 2010, and I looked at league play. And did you know that their average margin of victory, taking out the 2 games against Princeton, against our teams, where they did win, but they were single possession games, and then the 1 loss they had where Penn beat them. I don't know if people remember this, but Penn beat them resoundingly, like 15 or 20. Okay, take out those 3 games. The Big Red average margin of victory was 19 points in the league. So they just rolled.
Yeah, they could go.
I mean, they just rolled through. I think that has a lot to do with a whole lot of things. And Louisdale was certainly a big part of that as well. So Saturday, Penn now at 2-0 with wins against Brown and Cornell. Now they face off against the Columbia Lions, who, again, going into the season or going into conference play, dead last in terms of, wins, tied with Penn, 3 wins each of them going into conference play. And Columbia playing very well the night before, as John helped us understand, but then coming up short. So they're still without a win in Ivy League play, and they go into Penn and get a 4-point win. Lawrence and I talked about this game a bit offline. Lawrence, what were your takeaways from that game?
I have to give Columbia credit. It's a solid performance. A little shaky toward the end. I think it might be a little unkind to say they nearly snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. But I think in the weeks to come, they'll clean up the press break. They'll get their free throw situation figured out, and they're going to compete for that 4th spot in the Ivy tournament if they can keep what they had this weekend going.
Well said. I couldn't agree with you more. And I promise listeners on, especially in this segment, my eyes don't lie to me, that I'm not going to come with any preconceived notions. I'm going to watch the games, and I watched the games, and they played their tails off this past weekend. They played very hard and just ran into a much better team in Princeton, especially in that second half. And they came back even after disappointment and went into the Palestra. We all know, tough place to play and to win. And they got it done. Patrick Harding comes away with 21 rebounds, 10 offensive rebounds by himself. I mean, just ridiculous. Ike Nweke, fantastic weekend for him. And we'll touch upon that a bit later in our predictions, but an outstanding performance for him, over, I think, 43 points between the 2 games. So well done by Jim Engels to have the guys ready to roll, and good win for them. And just as you said, Lawrence, they will compete. Just as I called, I'm patting myself on the back. Brown comes up short against Dartmouth. I just thought that's a huge win for Brown to beat Harvard. I mean, it just means a lot for their program. It's a statement win. Harvard is in many ways a darling of national media attention because of Tommy Amaker. I don't begrudge that at all. It just, he brings so much cachet, and he's done a wonderful job there. And so when one of the lesser known programs, if you will, when they go in and beat Harvard, which I thought that they would do, I just felt there was going to be a little bit of a letdown. It's a huge statement win. And Dartmouth, in much the way that John talked about Jadwin Jim, respectfully, Dartmouth and Lead Arena, that's always a tough place to play because they have very little environment, COVID or non-COVID. Just respectfully, it's not it's you got to bring your own juice. And so I think it's a tough place to play. Dartmouth plays well at home. And I thought that home court advantage and a little bit of the letdown, a little bit of taking the foot off the gas from Brown was going to kick in. And lo and behold, they scored 46 points. Dartmouth was dominant defensively and got a 12-point win. And that rounded out the weekend. Sunday, we were looking for that Yale-Harvard game. Yale continues to be on pause. So a high-profile game that was scheduled to be on ESPNU and be a nice showcase for the league is postponed. But that rounds out our first week of Ivy League play, and we couldn't have enjoyed it as much as we did, and this conversation and this review, without having our special guest and chief correspondent, Jon Solomon. Jon, thanks for joining us in the conversation. Any parting words as we wrap this up?
No, just you two are doing great work with this podcast, and I'm delighted to be able to play some part. Where else am I going to get quotes from James Baldwin and Columbo samples alongside my basketball analysis?
We're just giving the people what they want to steal a line from Jalen and Jacoby, one of the power podcasts out there, but we're trying to carve out our own niche. And I'll say again, you are an immense inspiration for us to continue to have conversations like these, because this league, the coaches, the student athletes, dare I say the institutions, they warned it. Beautiful game, a great environment, and you always gave great color and perspective to the conversation. So we intend to have you back as often as we can.
Yeah, you had helped me exercise some muscles that had laid dormant for far too long. So anytime you want me to come back on and talk Ivy League basketball, I would be delighted. And I'm excited to see what other guests you have in future weeks to come.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
We have been raving about this young man's Giannis Antetokounmpo-like skills on the court from the start of the season, and we are thrilled to have him join us in person on the Ivy League Hoops Hour. Hailing from Newcastle, England, our guest arrived at Princeton in the fall of 2019 and established himself as a reliable rebounder and efficient offensive threat as a role player in his freshman season. Fast forward a year and a half later, and our guest is the dominant force behind a Tiger offensive attack that ranks in the top 25 of offensive efficiency in the country, averaging 1.096 points per game with an effective field goal percentage of 56%. That's actually 12th best in the country. Individually, our guest ranks 6th in the Ivies in both scoring and rebounding, and leads the Ivy League in field goal percentage and assists. For all of those reasons, and the fact that the Tigers could quite well find themselves in the NCAA tournament, he is my pick for Ivy League Player of the Year. We are honored to have him join us on the show. We have none other than Princeton Tiger forward, Tosan Evbuomwan. Tosan, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being on the show. And I do have that correct. You do hail from Newcastle, England, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so I am going to put you on the spot right away. I anticipate that you would be the best to answer this question. What is the proper way to refer to the beautiful game? Is it soccer or is it football?
It's football, but I haven't said that in a while. I've been in the States for a while, but definitely football.
I got you. So you're giving us all a pass. And tell me, what is the obsession with football in England, Europe, the rest of the world? In the States, we have a great women's national team. We have an up-and-coming men's team, but the passion, the fervor for that sport is unmatched in England. Can you tell us why? What are we missing?
I definitely agree. It's a huge part of the culture. I don't know. It's just something that's played by so many people from such a young age. I feel like it's the most accessible sport. The fan base is crazy, as you've mentioned. And yeah, it's just a really good way to get involved with sports, I think, at a young age. And it's kind of probably the best sport, like facilities-wise. and things like that, like professionalism in the UK. So it's definitely a good one to get involved with. And I think that helps with how popular it is.
I imagine then, since everyone played it at a young age, you did. How far did you go with it? And then we do want to continue talking about the game, but then how did that kind of progress to basketball if you played soccer at such a young age?
Yeah, I did. I played a lot of sports growing up, but it was my main sport for a while. So I was with Newcastle United Academy from, I think, 8 till 13. And I'd been playing up until I think I started playing when I was about 3. So 8 until 13. And then I continued playing at a bit of a lower level with like my high school and things up until maybe 15 or 16. And then I stopped when basketball kind of became the main sport and took over. So yeah, I was playing for a long while.
Fair enough. I'm sure you still follow the game closely. So I'll ask your opinion on this. There's a gentleman by the name of Roy Keane. I would imagine you know who that is.
I do. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. I'm talking to a friendly crowd here. So, Tosan, I'm a big fan of his, and folks on the show know we actually have a segment named after him called My Eyes Don't Lie to Me. And during the European Football Championships played this past summer, the Euros 2020, it was actually played in the summer of 2021 due to COVID. Your beloved England played against the unflappable Azzurri of Italy in the finals. The game came down to penalty kicks for our listeners' education, and Italy came out on top. But Roy Keane, the former great Manchester United midfielder, he now does commentary, and he went on the record as saying he thought that some of the more experienced players on the England roster, specifically Raheem Sterling and Jack Grealish, shied away from the big moment and should have demanded taking a penalty kick.
And if you're Sterling or Grealish, you cannot sit there and have a young kid walk up ahead of you. You can't. I don't care.
You think they should have volunteered?
You can't sit there and go, I see a young kid, 19, a child walking up in front of me, and I've played a lot more games, I've got a lot more experience. Sterling has won trophies. I'm not saying he wasn't prepared. Gareth might have been thinking you're going to be 6 or 7. You can't sit there. That must be hard to take. You got to get in front of this young kid and say, listen, I'll step up before you.
So I know this was a big controversy back home. Where do you come out on the controversy?
Well, I'm also a big Roy Keane fan. I'm actually a Manchester United fan too. So.
Great.
But I think with penalties, it's one of those where you have to want to take it. You can't be forced into it because you're already starting out on a bad foot. And I think you have to have that confidence. And I mean, we can debate over who should have taken them and who would have scored. But I backed Marcus Rashford with him being a United player too, and he scored penalties in big moments. So I didn't have a problem with him, for example, taking one. I know there's a lot of talk over how he was young and things like that. But there's not much else to say other than we missed them and we lost. But yeah, I think you have to want to take them, and I didn't have a problem with some of the guys who took them. It wasn't our day.
I'm with you.
It was frustrating, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, and it was a tough day, and football didn't quite come home that day, right? But
no, it didn't.
But one thing I don't understand, why do people react to missed penalty kicks with such anger when really, really good players, as you mentioned, Marcus Rashford is brilliant and a phenomenal person off the field, off the pitch. Why do people react the way they do when really good players miss them from time to time?
I mean, I think it's because of the moment, of course, and it was just all the passion being released, and not to excuse some of the things that went on after that game. But it's definitely a passionate build-up, and like you said, there was a lot of kind of build-up about it's coming home, and it really was coming home to all of us. We all believed it, and it was a tough moment for the country.
Now, Tosan, you'll be stunned to know we actually do talk about basketball on the show. Okay, so one more question is just: do you have anybody on the team that you're able to talk European English football with, Premier League? Anybody on the team that appreciates the game like you do?
Yeah, we have a couple guys, Conrad Kiszka and Jacob O'Connell, probably the two that watch it the most, and then a former player, Colby Kyle, who. He's probably more of a fan than I am. And yeah, we always have great conversations when we get to watch games and things like that amongst us. So it's good to have that connection still and be able to kind of speak about those things over here.
Tosan, you competed in 3-on-3 FIBA rules basketball for the under-23 Great Britain team, correct?
I did, yeah.
Okay, I'm extremely passionate about 3-on-3 FIBA rules specifically.
Okay.
I mean, it's better than even like how we do 3-on-3 half court. It's much faster. There's more decision making. I think it leads to like the development of modern era basketball players. And I love that there's the players are empowered more to kind of figure out things on the court. And I think that's essential to 5-on-5 play. Can you tell us your initial exposure to 3-on-3 FIBA rules? And then secondarily, what growth and development do you think it has played in your role or in your game today? Because I think you're a bona fide playmaker. And I wonder if you see any connections there between 3-on-3 and how your game is today.
Yeah, I had a great experience actually of that in summer. It was the first time GB had fielded a team of any age. So the men and women senior teams as well as under 23 had competitions all at similar times. So it was very new to the country. We were inexperienced going into it, but I think it was definitely good, and we got takeaways from it. And yeah, it was kind of as part of preparation for the Commonwealth Games this upcoming summer, which feature 3-on-3 as kind of the basketball competitiveness in the game. So that's replacing the traditional 5-on-5. So it was kind of a build up for that as a nation, with us being so new to it. But yeah, like you said, it's fast. It's a lot of decision making, and the players have more autonomy because there's no coaching really allowed during live play. So it's definitely players have to take ownership and leadership of kind of how you play. But I think, like you mentioned, it does definitely help with playmaking. I think it kind of simplifies reads with you having more space on the court. And yeah, it allows you to express yourself. There's more room to operate. And I think it's about having 3 playmakers and 3 versatile guys on the court. And we kind of learned that quickly as we were playing. But it was definitely a really fun experience. And I think it did definitely help with this season. If anything, I just hadn't played in a competitive game in a while. So that gave me an avenue to do so this summer. So yeah, really grateful for that opportunity.
I would tell you that I'm not sure if you're aware, but I was actually fortunate to play at Princeton like yourself, and was a captain of the team, and beating an arch rival like Penn. That was our main rival. I'm sure it still exists to this day. In a playoff game to go to the NCAA tournament was an amazing experience for me. I remember being on the bottom of a pile of students as they rushed the court, Tosan, and I had this feeling 2 things were going on. One, I was like, I might die right now as the students were rushing and jumping on top of me and my teammates. And I also had this feeling of like, this is the greatest moment of my life at that point. I'm just wondering, you have had such a journey and an amazing trip to Princeton, and then you've played all this basketball. Is there a seminal moment, either as a player or even as a student athlete, someone new to the States, that you will hold on? I've had a lot of memories like the one I just shared. Is there 1 or 2 or 3 that you will hold on for the rest of your life that's connected to Princeton or Princeton basketball?
Yeah, there's definitely been a few moments, and hoping for a moment similar to yours at the end of this year, and then looking forward to next year as well. So would love for that to be my favorite memory at Princeton. Thus far, definitely, probably just on a personal level, my first start freshman year against Indiana. And then the game we just won was absolutely unforgettable. And Charles, my teammate Matt Locko for hitting that game, and that was really special. And just a great game to be a part of and to win. Something that'll definitely stay with all of us, I think, for the rest of our lives. So those 2 stand out to me, and yeah, I hope to experience the same thing you did at the end of this year.
Well, I have your cell phone number, so we'll be able to keep in contact, and we can trade some notes on getting over the hump. But I don't remember being down 18 in the second half and storming back and winning the way you did. So take us into those huddles. Like what is there's got to be an incredible amount of belief, obviously leadership from your head coach and the staff, but then you guys go out and make the plays. What were those huddles like? Because that's a scary thing to be down 18 and it's so early in the season. Talk to me about those moments.
Yeah, I think it can be overwhelming for some people and in such big moments like that. But our coaching staff do a really good job of giving us confidence and encouragement. And we kind of have an attitude of we're going to win the game, whether we're up 5, whether we're down 20, we're down 10, we're always going to win the game. And that's kind of what was echoed throughout those huddles. We're going to win the game, we're going to win the game. We've got to stick to our stuff and details and just fight for each other. And that was pretty much coach's message throughout. Obviously, other things were involved, but it was, we're going to win the game. And how do we do that? And then it's obviously on those players to go out and be tough and finish it out. So, yeah, I think we have a great confidence and belief amongst the team and to get things like that done. And, we really just trust each other out there and have showed we've had a lot of fight to come back in games.
Individually, Tosan, what do you find or feel is your role in moments like that from an individual aspect? What do you really try to key in on?
I think to make winning plays, whether it be on the defensive or offensive end, just make winning plays. And whether it's myself getting a bucket or stop or my teammate getting a bucket, just making the right play and to win the game pretty much. I think that's all of us kind of have on the floor at those times.
Fair enough. Well, if I put my podcasting hat aside, obviously we're rooting very hard for you and your teammates this season. We're proud Princeton alums and joyful of the leadership that Coach Henderson has with the program and what you're doing, hoping that Jalen gets healthy. I know that Ethan Wright and Alako and all the guys are right there with you to make this great run. So we wish you the best and continued success with your studies. Before we let you go, I would ask you, and we always ask all of our guests moving forward, you've been at Princeton now, you've been there for a few years, you have a sense of the campus, you have a sense of the program, and you have a sense of the Ivy League athletically and as a group of schools. And I'm just wondering, is there a positive change, some kind of tweak that you would love to see occur in the near future to improve your experience and the experience of others?
Yeah, just thanks very much for having me. Firstly, enjoyed this conversation, but yeah, I think just kind of positive change and social justice continuing to be at the forefront of the league and decisions made with Princeton and the Ivy League itself. I think that's something definitely important that we continue to do moving forward.
Have you been inspired by the work that your teammate Elijah Barnes has taken on, and what kind of conversations and what can you share with us in terms of that relationship and the lead that Elijah has taken in that area?
Yeah, it's absolutely inspiring for myself, and I know for my teammates and coaches too. He's such a positive guy, and he's kind of taken ownership of making real change. And yeah, it was so inspiring seeing what he was doing. I was in the UK when a lot of his, I'll say, most public displays were kind of happening. But yeah, of course, having conversations with him and being able to observe from afar was really inspiring.
Well, his bravery, his intellect, his passion, his selflessness is also echoed, I think, very much in you, Tosan, and how you play and how you've been on this interview. And we're just so thrilled to have you on the Ivy League Hoops Hour. We wish you all the best on behalf of myself and Lawrence. Thanks a ton for joining us and for your time, and good luck the rest of the season.
Of course. Thank you very much.
And now is the segment of our show where we respond to listener emails. This week's email comes from Greg Frame, who writes, Sydney, I've enjoyed your show. I have to say you almost lost me with your initial take on the 92-4 debacle, but Boogie's reality check and your epiphany mean I'll tune in again. I've loved your player interviews. Cho was spectacular, and urge you to do at least one every week. The student athletes in this league are amazing kids. I think even the bench players have amazing journeys to the league and stories. Well,
Greg Frame should know, Lawrence. Greg Frame was one of the great Ivy League players in recent memory. I played against him in 93-94, which was my first year in the league, and Greg Frame's senior season. He's a member of the Dartmouth's 1,000-point club, 1,181 points to be exact. I did look that up, but he also grabbed 490 rebounds. big, stocky, very good point guard, and captained the Big Green his senior year, led the league in scoring, and was first team All-Ivy. So tip of the hat to Greg Frame, who caused me and my teammates nightmares and represented Dartmouth really well, and great feedback, Greg. You're spot on. And I have to tell you that conversation, Lawrence, that you and I had about 92-4, honestly, you coached me through that, and I appreciate it. And I think we all learned something, not only from that conversation, but certainly those coaches and student athletes. In fact, I'll just share with you that a heartfelt apology from Jason Kirk, the head coach of Sacred Heart Academy, was published in the Hartford Courant just the other day. And so there's a lot to learn from that, and sportsmanship essentially ruled the day. Thanks to that coach and the insight of Lawrence L. Boogie Schuler. And so feedback like that is greatly appreciated from Greg and any of our other listeners. Please, you're going to help us make this show better, and we are certainly going to respond with more interviews from the student athletes and any other suggestions that you guys send our way. So write into us at ivyleaguehoopshour@gmail.com, just like Greg and some our other listeners have, and tell us about guests you'd like to see, suggestions, feedback, the whole deal, and we will work it into the show. We promise.
And now it's time for our non-Ivy League nods. Coach, who have you got?
Yeah, this week, Lawrence, I've got another team that knocked off Duke, but I'll tell you, it's not an anti-Duke or Coach K show. It's actually quite the opposite, as it's always news when you're beating a highly ranked Duke team. So listeners of the show know that we highlighted the Ohio State Buckeyes earlier in the year when they knocked off Duke. And this week, we have our second non-Ivy nod of the week, focusing on an upset of the number 2 ranked Duke Blue Devils. It's the Miami Hurricanes, coached by longtime coach Jim Larinaga, who's won over 600 Division I basketball games. They went into Cameron Indoor Stadium with a 12-3 record and an undefeated 4-0 start to conference play, and walked away with the W. Neither team led by more than 3 points throughout the entire second half, and the Canes scored the last 5 points of the game and only committed Lawrence 5 turnovers versus Duke's well-recognized vaulted defense. So congrats to the Miami Hurricanes, who sit atop the current ACC standings despite being chosen to finish in the bottom of the conference in more than a few preseason polls. That's my non-Ivy nod of the week to the Hurricanes. How about you, Lawrence?
Try this one. Da, 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 dee, da, da, da.
On Wisconsin.
No. That was O Shepherd, Guide Thy Flock.
My nod goes to Coach Greg Gard of Wisconsin and his Wisconsin Badgers, who sit at 12-2 on the season and number 24 in the net rankings. Coach Gard last year was on the hot seat, but this year it looks like they're in a prime spot for an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament.
All together now. Oh, Shepherd, guide Wisconsin, fight right through that line.
And now it's time to spread some love around the Ivy League. Coach, what are you hearing out there?
Well, you know how we do. Where is the love? Where is the love? You got me going again, Lawrence. But hey, it's a favorite part of the show, although we're having fun all the way through. Now we're spreading love to Cornell men's hockey this week. They're ranked top 15 in the country after beating number 5 North Dakota in a pair of games this past weekend, 4-3 and 3-1, respectively. Cornell is led by standout freshman goaltender Ian Shane. They are a perfect 6-0 at home and held North Dakota to their first winless homestand since 2018. Well done, Cornell men's hockey.
It's time for predictions.
Predictions, Pat.
On Saturday, January 15th, we've got 4 games, each one tipping off at 2 p.m. Let's start with Brown at Princeton.
And that's the best one to start with because that's the game of the weekend as far as I'm concerned, with a nod to Monday's Penn-Princeton game, which remains one of the best rivalries in college basketball. But let's get back to Brown versus Princeton. Brown will finish in the top 4 of this league. I'm holding on to that, but Lawrence reminds me that a loss at Princeton would put the Bears at 1-3, and the route to Ivy Madness starts slipping away. I'll say this. If Princeton's Jalen Llewellyn doesn't play, he didn't suit up against Cornell. If he doesn't play, the Tigers are going to miss his 16 points per game, and Brown wins the game. All right? A conditional pick. If Llewellyn plays, the Tigers remain undefeated. They've got a whole lot of offense, and so I think they can get the job done.
Next up, we've got Harvard at Columbia.
I promised our listeners that I would pay homage to my guy, Roy Keane, the great midfielder for Ireland and Manchester United, and now current soccer commentator who says my eyes don't lie to me.
My eyes don't lie to me.
We all know that week in, week out. I'm sharing that with our listeners. Well, it's clear to my eyes from watching this past weekend's games that despite a 3-9 record entering league play, head coach Jim Engels has sparked a fire in his Lions team. The numbers of the Lions front court, you got to listen to this, Lawrence. Their starting center, Patrick Harding, had 11 rebounds in 23 minutes versus Princeton and followed that with 21 rebounds. And it was actually 11 offensive rebounds in that game, 5 points and 4 assists versus Columbia. His front court partner, Ike Nweke, scored 43 points, grabbed 20 rebounds, and shot 60% from the field in those two games. Well, what's Harvard's weakness? They are a jump shooting make or miss team, Lawrence, and they've been missing their bigs all season long. Mason Forbes did play against Brown, gave them some minutes, but pretty much not a lot of production. He's still trying to get his legs underneath him. Always a close game between Harvard and Columbia. Columbia wins this game.
Next, we've got Cornell at Yale.
Cornell has been an offensive machine. We've talked a lot about that all season, but their two-game total of 23 assists, Lawrence, versus Princeton and Penn, that's their lowest two-game total of the entire season. In fact, the Big Red actually have 23 assists in a single game 5 times this season. And incidentally, those are all wins. Trying to get the Big Red to play slow, that seems to be the formula for the Ivy League in terms of beating the Princeton offensive Cornell head coach Brian Earl. The irony of that does make me chuckle. I think Yale will struggle to slow them down. I think they will allow some fast-paced play just because Yale doesn't have their rhythm, their cardio, their conditioning, their overall sharpness. All of that is going to be challenged. They haven't played meaningful basketball in a pair of weeks and only 2 games in all of December. Cornell beats the Yale Bulldogs.
And to round out the Saturday schedule, Dartmouth at Penn.
Another example of my commitment to react to what I'm seeing in the games and not come to each game with these lofty predictions that I've made. All right. I mean what I say in the moment. And right now, the Penn Quakers look like a top 4 team. They're threatening that, certainly with wins versus Brown and Cornell. Their non-conference schedule was brutal, but it toughened them up. And also the Ivy League scheduling blessed Penn with 4 of its first conference games being at home. Penn will take full advantage. They'll knock off the Big Green.
And moving to Monday, January 17th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, 2 p.m. tip-off, Columbia at Cornell.
Well, before we talk about the games, let's say well done, Ivy League, in terms of making Martin Luther King Jr. Day a day to celebrate one of the greatest Americans to ever live, and doing so with a celebration of basketball. I love the idea and only wish I could have participated either as a student athlete or as a coach in the celebration that the Ivy League has put together. Let's also be mindful, though, folks, that Dr. King's words still challenge us today to rid ourselves of racism and injustice in our country. Now, looking at the games played on ML King Jr. Day, I look at Cornell holding home court advantage versus Columbia. Princeton beats Penn in the second best game of the weekend. Again, the Quakers have been impressive, but let's see how their road performance is during the rest of the season. I think Brown actually has the best Ivy League weekend it's had in recent years by beating Princeton, assuming Llewellyn doesn't play, and then coming home to hold off Yale at home. And last but not least, Harvard goes 0-2, folks. Yep, that's what I'm going with, Lawrence, on the weekend with a loss versus Dartmouth. Dartmouth is really tough to play at in Lead Arena. I don't like having to make jump shots as my only method of winning games, and that's what Harvard's looking at right now in terms of their current form. So I'm going with the Big Green. All right, Lawrence, those are my picks for the games. What have you got on your end?
Predictions, Pat. Keep it short.
In the Saturday games, I've got Princeton over Brown, Harvard over Columbia, Cornell over Yale, and Penn over Dartmouth. On Monday, I'm a little more nervous about these picks. I may just be losing my mind. I might be just picking the old Ivy League grandees, or knowing that I'm a game behind off of last week's picks, I might just be, in Tony Soprano terms, chasing it. I've got Cornell over Columbia, Princeton over Penn, Yale over Brown, and Harvard over Dartmouth.
Well, we'll see how those turn out, Lawrence. You know we're having fun with this, so folks, don't put too much money on these picks, and know that we're always going to react to the games themselves in addition to crunching the numbers and looking at the analytics. So from week to week, things will change. Either way, we invite you guys to join the conversation and let us know what you think in terms of the current form of these student athletes, the teams, and how things are trending. Join the conversation with your email responses or comments with Ivy League Hoops Hour at gmail.com as your way to get in touch with us. And we'll keep this going from week to week. Well, Lawrence, I think we're starting to hit our groove with the show. We're loving this week in and week out in terms of the Ivy League Hoops Hour. It's been fantastic to have the guests that we've had on. And obviously, eyes don't lie to me. My eyes don't lie to me in terms of reviewing the games, our predictions. It's just a labor of love to cover all things men's basketball. And we need you all to continue to join us and give us your feedback. You've already enhanced the show, telling us where you think we're right on the money, where we can bring in a different guest. Any suggestions, they're all welcome at Ivy League Hoops Hour at gmail.com. That's the best way to get to us. Also know that we have a YouTube channel creatively titled The Ivy League Hoops Hour, so you can tune in to us there. And certainly let your friends, your family, colleagues, randoms that you might bump into, just tell them, listen in on The Ivy League Hoops Hour and join this party between myself, Coach Johnson, and Lawrence L. Boogie Schuler. Thank you much to Jon Solomon, our chief correspondent, for joining us, and look for future appearances from him. And we'd also throw an open invite to any of you folks out there from any of the other Ivy League institutions. And if you're close to those games and able to cover them in person, certainly send us an email. We'd love to hear from you, and certainly we'll include you in the show. We also want to thank our guest, Tosan Evbuomwan, for joining us. And looking at the Tigers, they certainly look really, really strong and formidable. We'll see what this week shows for games with them in their current form. You'll be able to rely on myself and Lawrence to give you our takes next week. Please join us.
Listen a minute, everybody. I've got an announcement to make. It's about Sir. Well, sir, we'd all like to thank you very much for everything you've done for us, and we'd like to give you a little present to remember us by.
Good mobility, really improved footwork. I've really been impressed with what they've gotten out of him as of late. And here you see coming down, if you're short, guess who's coming to dinner?
They call me Mr. Tibbs.